Hello everybody, my name is Rachel. Welcome to my channel, Kalanati. Today I'm going to wrap up all the books that I read for Space Opera September. This is a readathon hosted by Thomas from SFF 180, and as you can tell from the name of the readathon, it is all about reading space opera in September. I read books for all of the challenges, but I don't remember what all of them were, so I'm just going to talk about the books and not really about which challenges they were for. So let's get into this. I'm kind of running out of filming time today, so I'm going to go through these a bit faster than I had intended on. The first thing I want to talk about is Killing Gravity by Corey J. White. This is a novella and it is the first in a trilogy, I believe. I will not be continuing with the series, though I didn't particularly enjoy this. It's kind of like space fantasy horror with a bit of a gritty cyberpunk edge to it. It is about a woman who is kind of horribly modified in a lab as a child and given like psychic powers. She can kill people with her mind. And it is a very violent, bloody, gory story where people are trying to recapture her because of her abilities, and she is leading them on a merry chase and dragging a bunch of other people into her problem. I did not like this because of the level of violence and gore. It's one of those stories where you're not even sure what the body count is because all the bodies have been pretty much vaporized into a pool of blood, gristle, and other bodily fluids, and it's kind of gross. I thought it was very relentlessly paced as well, and that did not help with character development. So many big things happen to the main character, but none of it seems to have an impact because she never slows down. She never stops to think and process anything. So it's a lot of crazy things happening and it doesn't seem to really matter by the end. So I didn't really enjoy it, and I'm not planning on continuing with the series. Then I read Tau Zero by Poul Anderson. This one I do remember which challenge I read it for. It was read a book that was published before you were born. This was published in 1970, and I really wanted to try more by Poul Anderson. I read his fantasy novel The Broken Sword a little while ago, and while it was very dark and depressing and not my favorite thing, I did think it was very well written. So I went into Tau Zero expecting just good writing for an older SF book, and it was definitely that. I actually thought that some of the opening chapters were practically lyrical prose, just really beautifully set the scenery and introduced the characters and the plot and everything. So I set out to really enjoy Tau Zero, and then frankly, it fell apart in the second half for me, and that is perhaps a matter of personal taste and not necessarily an issue with the book. So in very rough terms, the plot is that a spaceship is headed towards an alien planet. The crew are going to analyze it and see if they can establish a colony there. They're traveling very near the speed of light. I'm not sure if this is actually FTL, but it has to do with the time differential where very little time is passing for the crew, subjectively speaking, but a lot of time is passing back on Earth. And then basically the ship gets stuck in overdrive and they can't stop and they can't slow down. It's a thought experiment about like general relativity or something. I think that what this story was going for, what Anderson was going for, was both the technical scientific drama, a very hard SF idea, but also the human drama. And I will give him major points for this because this is not an older hard SF novel that shirks the character development. And I was really impressed at the beginning because a lot of the characters are women, women in positions of authority in the crew, scientists, engineers, etc. They're also a very international group, so it's not just white men and white women. There are like Chinese people as well. And I liked that. I thought it was very interesting that most of the first characters introduced were women. And then, it just kind of went off the rails for me. The way that the story progressed with like the time differential and general relativity and loads of time passing actually reminded me a lot of the scenario in Death's End by Liu Cixin. That's the last book in the trilogy that begins with the three-body problem. In a slightly similar situation of, can you go so fast that you escape the death of the universe and enter into a reborn universe? Is that even possible? I'm not sure I believed that this was actually scientifically accurate. But at that point, I just sort of lost interest. I didn't really care what was happening to the ship once it became obvious they were not going to make it to their actual destination. I don't know why I stopped caring. And then the human drama or melodrama. This is the bit that actually irritated me because I thought that it would just go into like sexist, misogynistic territory, and I don't think it does that outright. What I do think is that the male characters and the female characters definitely fall into gendered categories, and it's a bit difficult to see at first, but then you notice it and you can't stop noticing it. And there's just so much messy relationship drama with all the characters sleeping with each other and constantly changing their relationships and stuff. I just was like, guys, you could die in the next hour. Why are you bed hopping? Maybe work on like the technical problem instead of, you know, crying over your ex-boyfriend sleeping with somebody else, like whatever. But what happened is that most of the male characters fall into the category of dealing with the technical problem, being the scientists and engineers, and making the hard decisions. And then the women, no matter what their actual jobs are, they fall into the category of being the emotional support. They're mostly described in terms of which men they're in relationships with and how they are bolstering and helping those men in their relationships. So the men seem to be doing the work, whereas the women seem to be doing that very feminine task of dealing with the emotional, psychological issues and being the support, rather than, you know, also being the scientists and engineers. And it's not like superbly irritating or anything, but it's interesting that a book that began so solidly with female characters couldn't escape the gender roles by the end. So it was a relatively interesting book. I do think it was written very well. I just didn't really love the second half of it. Rendezvous on Noxus by S.A. McNeill. This is a debut novel and the first in a projected series, though it's been a number of years and the second book has never come out. If it does, I would try it. I moderately liked this, I'll say that. The bones of the story of the book, quite good. It's this very solid, typical space opera setup where you've got like merchant ships plying their trade in between space stations and everything. It's about a woman who's the captain of her ship. She's got a one-man crew, and all hell breaks loose when she encounters a bounty hunter and starts helping him in kind of his revenge quest against this evil crime lord guy. There's a subplot with some romance, another subplot with this alien species that's kind of mysterious and shape-shifting. It was relatively interesting. I liked that. I found myself irritated by the main character though, mostly because she falls into this very cliche type of strong female character that I have come to hate recently. The type of woman that you know she's strong because she represses her emotions, has lots of messy relationships with men or women and or both, and drinks a lot. Like she can get into the bar fights and drink with all the guys. And basically the main character here, Paris, I think is her name, she's got a drinking problem. It's an obvious problem and it's kind of used to make the plot happen, and I thought it was frankly ridiculous, and I'm just like really logical about this and saying maybe you should deal with your drinking problem, or maybe you're not actually such a good captain if you get into situations like this because you didn't think that drinking alone would maybe not be dangerous. Anyway, I won't rant about that. Like I said, I would read more by this author. I would definitely like to read further adventures in this series, in this world. But this book was definitely a debut novel. And yeah, solid bones, good structure, a little bit hazy in some of the details. Beyond the Empire by K.B. Wagers. This was a last-minute addition to my space opera TBR because I just picked it up in the middle of the month and I'd forgotten that it was space opera. This is the third and final book in the Andronin War trilogy, and frankly I don't want to talk about it very much. I found it very disappointing. I enjoyed the first book, I really liked the second book, and this third book disappointed me so much. And I don't know if it's the book or me. Maybe I wasn't in a good mood when I read it. Maybe I was just way too sensitive and couldn't overlook some of the weaknesses, but what mostly irritated me so much with this book is that the writing quality hasn't improved enough since the first book. Wagers has some very obvious authorial tics, especially in how she repetitively describes people's facial expressions and body language, and it was ridiculously obvious and out of place in this book. It goes beyond just the joke about characters raising their eyebrows all the time in the first two books. In this one, they smile and laugh all the time. Terrible things are happening. Everybody's dealing with the terror of losing a war and grief over many, many lost friends and family. And yet, the only way that you can tell that they're actually sad or actually trying to be serious is when they smile sadly or try to repress a grin in a serious situation. It would be fine if it was just one character who was doing this, because yes, there are some people who deal with grief and uncertain times by, dark humor and cracking jokes and smiling, but every single person does that in this book. It's not realistic, and it started to take me out of the story every single time that it happened. And this should have been fixed by an editor. You could have just cut out, just deleted every time that this happened, and nobody would ever have noticed. It would have been perfectly fine. On top of this, I feel like the plotting was pretty sloppy, the way that the action played out, decisions, the sequence of events, the use of some characters as plot devices, like, what's her name? The Faze, the Farian. She's a psychic space elf who's just there to predict the future so they can move the plot along, and that is sloppy. So I wanted to love this, and it actually ended the trilogy really poorly, in my opinion. I was gonna go on and read the Farian War trilogy and other things by Wagers, but I was just so irritated after finishing this. I'm gonna take a break. Just move on to other things for the time being and calm down. I'm feeling like worked up again just talking about it. After that, though, I finished the last book on my TBR, Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliott, and this turned out to be one of my favorite books of the readathon and of the month. I loved this. It wasn't perfect, but I loved it by the end. I have enough to say about it that I'm going to do a separate review, so more on this one in the future. Those are all the things that I read for Space Opera September. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I will definitely participate in the readathon again next year. Let me know if you also participated. What did you finish for the readathon? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.